The three parallel scars that ran from Maya Rodriguez's left temple to the corner of her mouth looked like claw marks in certain light, but when she stood before a mirror at precisely the right angle, they formed something else entirely, the Chinese character for truth, carved into her flesh by men who thought they were silencing her forever. What they had actually done was create a living testament that would bring down the largest human trafficking network on the West Coast and expose corruption that reached from street-level pimps to federal courthouses. This is the story of how a freelance journalist's refusal to abandon a story led to her being marked for death, and how those marks became the key to saving hundreds of lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had been investigating missing persons cases for 18 months when she first noticed the pattern: young women, mostly immigrants, disappearing from specific neighborhoods in Los Angeles with disturbing regularity. The police reports were perfunctory, the investigations cursory, and the media coverage non-existent. These were invisible people vanishing into an invisible system, and Maya was the only person who seemed to care enough to connect the dots. Working from her cramped apartment in Silver Lake, Maya had built a wall-sized map connecting disappearances, last known locations, and the businesses that operated in those areas. The pattern that emerged was both obvious and terrifying: a network of massage parlors, restaurants, and warehouses that served as fronts for something much darker. But when Maya tried to interest mainstream media outlets in her findings, she was met with polite dismissals and suggestions that she focus on more manageable stories. The first real break came when Maria Santos, a 17-year-old from Guatemala, managed to escape from a warehouse in Vernon and found her way to a women's shelter. Maria's story was horrific: months of captivity, forced labor, and systematic abuse by men who threatened to kill her family if she ever spoke about what she had experienced. But Maria was brave enough to trust Maya with details that began to illuminate the true scope of the trafficking operation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They have policemen who help them, Maria had whispered during their first interview, her hands shaking as she clutched a cup of coffee, and judges, and men in suits who come to choose girls for special parties. They call them the untouchables, because nobody can arrest them. Maya's investigation had been careful and methodical, built on public records, financial documents, and interviews with survivors like Maria. She had been preparing a comprehensive exposé that would name names and trace money flows when everything went wrong. Someone had been watching her investigation, tracking her sources, and preparing to silence her before her story could see publication. It happened on a Tuesday evening in March, as Maya walked from her car to her apartment building. Three men in dark clothing had been waiting in the shadows of the alley beside her building, and they moved with the coordinated precision of people who had done this before. There was no robbery attempt, no sexual assault, no random violence, just a calculated message delivered with surgical precision. "This is what happens to people who ask too many questions," one of them had said in accented English as another held her down. The third man had produced a knife with a blade that caught streetlight like liquid mercury. "These marks will remind you and everyone who sees you that some stories are not meant to be told." The cuts were deliberate and careful, designed to scar permanently but not to kill. Maya had lost consciousness from pain and shock, waking hours later in her own blood with her face on fire and her life forever changed. But her attackers had made a crucial mistake. They had assumed that marking her would end her investigation rather than intensifying it. The emergency room staff at Cedars-Sinai had been professional and sympathetic, but Maya could see the questions in their eyes. Facial injuries like hers suggested domestic violence or gang activity, and the police officer who took her statement clearly believed she was withholding information about the attack. When Maya insisted that it was connected to her journalism work, the officer's expression suggested he thought she was being dramatic. "Ma'am, with respect, freelance bloggers don't usually attract this kind of attention," Officer Bradley had said while filling out his report. "Are you sure there isn't someone in your personal life who might have done this? An ex-boyfriend, maybe, or someone you owe money to?" Maya had tried to explain about her investigation, about Maria's testimony, about the network of businesses and officials she had been mapping. But without concrete evidence of threats or obvious connections between her work and the attack, the police treated it as random violence in a city where random violence was commonplace. Lying in her hospital bed with her face wrapped in bandages, Maya had felt the weight of failure crushing down on her. Months of investigation, dozens of interviews, hundreds of hours of research, all of it seemingly for nothing. The men who had attacked her were sending a message not just to her but to anyone else who might consider looking too closely at their operation. But as the days passed and the initial shock wore off, Maya began to understand that her attackers had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had tried to silence her by marking her, but the marks themselves had become evidence. Every person who saw her scars would ask questions about how she got them, creating opportunities to tell Maria's story and the stories of countless other victims. When the bandages finally came off, and Maya saw her reflection for the first time, she experienced a moment of devastating grief for the face she had lost. The scars were exactly as her attackers had intended, permanent, visible, and impossible to ignore. But as she stared at her reflection, Maya began to see something else in those marks, a responsibility to the women whose stories had led to her disfigurement, and a determination to ensure their suffering had not been in vain. Recovery from facial trauma involved more than physical healing. Maya spent weeks learning to navigate a world where people stared, whispered, and made assumptions about her based on the scars that had become the most prominent feature of her appearance. Simple activities like buying groceries or meeting sources became exercises in endurance as she faced the mixture of pity, curiosity, and fear that her marked face inspired in strangers. But Maya discovered that her scars also opened doors that had previously been closed. Other survivors of violence recognized something in her marked face that made them willing to share stories they had never told before. Women who had escaped trafficking operations, abuse survivors, and witnesses to crimes began reaching out to Maya, drawn by the visible evidence that she understood the cost of speaking truth to power. "You look like someone who won't run away when things get dangerous," said Carmen Vasquez, a former victim who contacted Maya 3 weeks after the attack. Carmen had spent 2 years trapped in the same network that Maya had been investigating, and she had information that could connect specific businesses to specific crimes. "The men who hurt you, they think scars make you weak, but scars mean you survived something that was supposed to kill you." Maya's investigation resumed with new urgency and new resources. The attack had attracted attention from advocacy groups and civil rights organizations, who recognized the implications of journalists being targeted for reporting on human trafficking. The Coalition Against Modern Slavery provided Maya with legal support and security consultation, while the Investigative Reporters Network offered technical assistance and backup for her digital files. Working from a secure location provided by her new allies, Maya began rebuilding her investigation with enhanced security protocols and expanded source networks. The wall map of disappearances and connected businesses grew more detailed and more disturbing as additional survivors came forward with information about the trafficking operation's scope and sophistication. The network was larger than Maya had initially realized, extending from Los Angeles through San Diego and up the coast to San Francisco. Dozens of businesses served as fronts for forced labor operations, while corrupt officials provided protection from law enforcement interference. The financial flows involved millions of dollars annually, much of it laundered through legitimate businesses owned by people who appeared to be respectable community leaders. "The man who cut your face, his name is Victor Kozlov," Carmen revealed during a secured interview session. "He works for people who own half the businesses on your map. When someone gets too close to the truth, Victor makes them disappear or marks them as a warning to others." Maya felt a chill of recognition as she processed this information. Victor Kozlov was a name that had appeared in several police reports related to her case, but always as a person of interest who couldn't be located for questioning. Now she understood why. Victor wasn't just a random criminal, but a professional enforcer working for the trafficking network she had been investigating. The revelation that her attack had been specifically ordered by the trafficking network transformed Maya's understanding of her situation. This wasn't random violence or a simple warning, it was an attempted execution that had failed only because Victor had chosen to send a message rather than simply killing her. The next time Maya realized, there might not be a next time. "They're watching you now," Carmen warned. "Victor doesn't like to leave jobs unfinished, and the people he works for don't like witnesses. You should disappear for a while, maybe leave the state until this dies down." But Maya knew that disappearing would mean abandoning Maria, Carmen, and dozens of other women who were still trapped in the trafficking network. Her investigation had reached a critical point where she had enough evidence to expose major players in the operation, but only if she could complete her research and find a publication willing to take the legal and security risks involved in publishing such explosive material. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Chang, a plastic surgeon who had consulted on Maya's case, noticed something unusual about the scarring pattern on her face. The cuts had been made with surgical precision, following the natural lines of facial muscles in a way that suggested medical training or extensive experience with human anatomy. These weren't random slashes, Dr. Chang explained during a follow-up appointment. Whoever did this understood exactly how facial tissue heals and how scars form. The pattern is almost deliberate, like they were trying to create specific markings rather than just cause disfigurement. Maya asked Dr. Chang to document the scarring pattern in detail, and when she studied the medical photographs, she began to see what her attackers had actually done. The 3 parallel lines weren't random at all. They formed a pattern that, when viewed from certain angles, resembled traditional warning markings used by organized crime groups to identify informants and traitors. The realization that she had been marked with specific symbols rather than random scars added another dimension to Maya's investigation. Her attackers weren't just trying to silence her, they were advertising her as an example to others who might consider investigating their operations. The marks on her face were intended to be a walking billboard for the consequences of crossing the trafficking network. But Maya also understood that symbols could be powerful tools for communication, and that her marked face could send messages beyond what her attackers had intended. Every interview she conducted, every public appearance she made, every photograph that documented her scars was also documenting the brutality of the people she was investigating. As Maya prepared to take her investigation public, she realized that her scars had become more than evidence of a crime. They had become a platform for advocacy and a symbol of resistance against forces that preferred to operate in darkness. The men who had marked her as a warning had inadvertently created a beacon that would draw attention to the very crimes they were trying to hide. The question now was whether Maya could complete her investigation and publish her findings before Viktor Kozlov decided to finish what he had started. Maya's investigation reached a breakthrough when she discovered that the trafficking network's financial operations were more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Working with forensic accountants from the Coalition Against Modern Slavery, she began tracing money flows through a maze of shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and international wire transfers that revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise. The network wasn't just moving people, it was moving massive amounts of money through legitimate businesses that served as both fronts in money laundering operations. Restaurants reported impossible revenues for their size and location, massage parlors showed profits that defied economic logic, and warehouses claimed storage fees that exceeded the value of entire city blocks. The financial evidence painted a picture of criminal activity generating hundreds of millions of dollars annually. This isn't just local trafficking, explained Sarah Kim, the forensic accountant who had volunteered to help Maya's investigation. This is international organized crime with connections to financial institutions, real estate developers, and government contracts. The people running this operation have the resources to corrupt officials at multiple levels. Maya's scarred face had become a liability in some ways, making it difficult to conduct undercover research or approach sources without drawing attention. But it had also become an asset, marking her as someone who had paid a price for her commitment to the truth. Sources who might have been reluctant to speak with a conventional journalist were willing to trust someone who bore visible evidence of the network's brutality. The most significant breakthrough came when Elena Volkov, a former accountant for the trafficking network, agreed to meet with Maya after seeing news coverage of her attack. Elena had managed the financial records for several front businesses before escaping with evidence that could expose the network's entire operational structure. I kept copies of everything, Elena revealed during a secure meeting arranged through the coalition. Bank records, transaction logs, communications between the bosses and their contacts in government. I was going to take it to the FBI, but then I learned that some FBI agents are on their payroll too. Elena's evidence was devastating. Financial records showed regular payments to police officers, immigration officials, judges, and federal agents. The trafficking network had systematically corrupted law enforcement at multiple levels, ensuring that investigations would be misdirected, evidence would disappear, and witnesses would be discredited or eliminated. Maya realized that her own case was a perfect example of this corruption in action. The police investigation into her attack had been perfunctory because the detectives involved were either incompetent or compromised. Evidence had been lost, witnesses hadn't been interviewed, and her claims about the connection to human trafficking had been dismissed without serious consideration. Viktor Kozlov has been operating in Los Angeles for 8 years, Elena continued, sharing photographs and surveillance images from her files. He's personally responsible for at least 15 murders and dozens of attacks like yours. But every time someone tries to investigate him, the case gets transferred or the evidence disappears. The photographs Elena provided allowed Maya to finally see the face of the man who had marked her. Viktor Kozlov was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that would help him blend into crowds. But his eyes held a coldness that Maya recognized from her brief encounter with him in the alley beside her apartment. Elena's records also revealed the network's recruitment and control methods. Young women were lured from their home countries with promises of legitimate employment, then trapped through debt bondage, document theft, and threats against their families. The psychological control was as sophisticated as the financial operations, designed to break down victims' resistance and ensure compliance through carefully calibrated combinations of hope and fear. They rotate girls between different locations every few weeks, Elena explained. Massage parlors, private parties, agricultural facilities, even some legitimate businesses where they work as unpaid labor. The constant movement makes it almost impossible for law enforcement to track them, and it prevents the girls from forming relationships or learning enough about their location to escape. Maya began to understand why her investigation had attracted such violent attention. She hadn't just been mapping the physical locations of trafficking operations, she had been uncovering a criminal enterprise that generated enormous profits while maintaining extensive protection through corruption. Her research threatened not just street-level criminals, but powerful people who had invested in the network's continued operation. The evidence Elena provided also explained the pattern of disappearances Maya had been tracking. Many of the missing women hadn't simply vanished, they had been moved to different parts of the network when their presence in one location became problematic. Some had been shipped to other cities, some had been sold to different criminal organizations, and some had been killed when they became too difficult to control. Maria Santos was lucky, Elena said, referring to the young woman whose testimony had started Maya's investigation. Most girls who try to escape are caught and used as examples to the others. They make sure everyone knows what happens when you try to run. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized the scope of suffering her investigation had uncovered. Hundreds of women were currently trapped in the network, enduring daily abuse while generating profits for their captors. Every day Maya spent building her case was another day those women remained in captivity. But Elena's evidence also provided the key to bringing down the entire operation. The financial records included specific dates, amounts, and recipients for bribes paid to corrupt officials. Bank records showed money flows that could be traced to specific criminal activities. Communications revealed the command structure of the organization and the identities of its leadership. If this information reaches the right people, honest investigators who aren't on the payroll, it could shut down the whole network. Elena concluded, but it has to be done carefully. If they know we have this evidence, they'll kill everyone involved and disappear. Maya realized that she now possessed the evidence needed to expose a massive criminal enterprise, but she also understood that publishing this information would make her an even bigger target. Viktor Kozlov and his employers would do everything possible to prevent her from revealing their secrets, and their next attempt to silence her would likely be their last. Maya's first face-to-face encounter with Viktor Kozlov since her attack came when she least expected it. She was leaving a secure meeting with Elena at a downtown coffee shop when she noticed him sitting at a corner table, calmly reading a newspaper as if he were any other customer enjoying his morning coffee. The recognition was instant and visceral. Even weeks later, she could never forget the face of the man who had carved warnings into her flesh. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe, and Viktor smiled with the casual confidence of a predator who knew his prey couldn't escape. He folded his newspaper deliberately, stood up slowly, and walked toward Maya's table with the unhurried pace of someone who had all the time in the world. Other patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that a killer was moving through their midst.
Miss
Rodriguez, Victor said in his accented English, pulling out a chair without invitation, "You are looking well. The scars healed nicely, very clean lines, very precise. I do good work, yes." Maya's hand instinctively moved toward the emergency panic button the coalition had given her, but Victor noticed the movement and shook his head gently. "I would not recommend calling for help. My associates are watching this location, and we would prefer to keep this conversation private." Elena had gone pale with terror, recognizing Victor from the photographs she had shared with Maya. Her files contained detailed records of Victor's activities, including surveillance photos and financial records showing payments for his services. Seeing him in person transformed abstract evidence into immediate physical threat. "What do you want?" Maya asked, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I want to offer you opportunity for peaceful resolution," Victor replied, signaling the waitress for coffee. "My employers are aware of your continued investigation, and they would prefer to avoid further unpleasantness. They are prepared to make generous compensation offer in exchange for your withdrawal from this matter." The casual way Victor discussed murder and mutilation as unpleasantness revealed the depth of his psychological detachment from the suffering he caused. Maya realized she was looking at someone who had been systematically desensitized to violence through years of inflicting it on others. "They tried to buy me off before," Maya said, referring to earlier attempts by unknown parties to discourage her investigation. "Money isn't going to make me forget about the women you're trafficking." Victor's expression didn't change, but Maya caught a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Yes, this is what they told me about you. Very stubborn, very idealistic. But perhaps you do not fully understand the situation you have created for yourself and your friends." He placed a tablet on the table and showed Maya surveillance footage of her apartment building, her parents' house, and several locations where she had conducted interviews with trafficking survivors. The message was clear. Victor's organization had been monitoring not just Maya, but everyone connected to her investigation. "We know about Elena's cooperation with your research," Victor continued, glancing at the terrified accountant. "We know about the documents she has stolen from our organization. We know about your meetings with law enforcement, and your contacts at advocacy organizations. Nothing you have done has been secret from us." Elena made a small whimpering sound and started to stand up, but Victor's hand shot out and gripped her wrist with casual violence.
Sit down, Elena.
"We are not finished with our conversation." Maya realized that Victor wasn't just threatening her, he was demonstrating the futility of resistance against an organization with seemingly unlimited resources and reach. Every source she had cultivated, every safe house she had used, every precaution she had taken had been observed and catalogued by the trafficking network. "The scars I gave you were intended as warning," Victor said, releasing Elena's wrist and returning his attention to Maya. "But warnings are only effective if they are heeded. My employers are beginning to think that more permanent solution may be necessary." "If you kill me, the story doesn't die with me," Maya replied, hoping her voice carried more confidence than she felt. "I've shared everything with multiple sources. Killing me would just confirm everything I've written about your organization." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Miss Rodriguez, you seem to believe that truth has some kind of magical power to protect you. But truth is just information, and information can be controlled, manipulated, or eliminated. We have been doing this for many years." He showed Maya another video on his tablet, footage of a newspaper office burning, surveillance images of a reporter being arrested on fabricated charges, and what appeared to be the aftermath of a car accident involving a person Maya didn't recognize. "Other journalists have investigated our operations," Victor explained. "Some accepted our generous offers and found new careers in different cities. Others required more persuasive methods of education. A few insisted on pursuing their investigations despite multiple warnings." He gestured to the accident footage. "Those individuals are no longer able to pursue any investigations." Maya felt the walls closing in as she understood the true scope of the threat she faced. Victor's organization didn't just kill problematic journalists, they systematically destroyed their credibility, eliminated their sources, and erased their evidence. The trafficking network had survived multiple investigations because they had the resources and connections to neutralize threats before they could become public. "But you are different," Victor continued, studying Maya's scarred face with professional interest. You have become symbol, yes. The brave journalist who survived attack and continued fighting for justice. Killing you now would create publicity problems that my employers prefer to avoid. Elena started to speak, but Victor silenced her with a look that promised immediate violence if she interrupted. Maya realized that Elena was probably going to die regardless of what happened in this conversation. She knew too much, and had already betrayed the organization. So I am here to make final offer, Victor concluded. Accept compensation, relocate to different city, and forget about trafficking networks in Los Angeles. Or continue your investigation and discover that the next time we meet, I will not be so concerned about publicity problems. Maya looked at Victor's calm expression and realized that he genuinely believed she would accept his offer. He had broken so many people through violence and intimidation that he couldn't imagine someone choosing principle over survival. The scars on her face, which he saw as proof of his power, had become to Maya a reminder of why this fight mattered. I'll need time to consider your offer, Maya said finally. Victor smiled and stood up. You have 24 hours, Miss Rodriguez. Choose wisely. The 24 hours Victor had given Maya felt like a countdown to her own execution. Elena had disappeared immediately after their encounter at the coffee shop, and Maya knew with sick certainty that the former accountant was either dead or soon would be. The weight of Elena's fate pressed down on Maya's conscience like a physical burden, another life destroyed because of her investigation. Maya spent those hours in a safe house provided by the coalition, reviewing every piece of evidence she had gathered and trying to find a way to publish her story before Victor's deadline expired. But she was discovering that the trafficking network's corruption extended even deeper than Elena's financial records had suggested. Several news outlets that had initially expressed interest in her investigation suddenly became unavailable. Editors stopped returning calls, and legal departments raised insurmountable concerns about liability and source protection. They're systematically cutting off your publication options, explained David Chen, an attorney working with the coalition, who shared Maya's last name but no family connection. Every major media outlet in the city has received either legal threats or pressure from advertisers. Someone with serious influence is working to ensure your story never sees print. Maya realized that Victor's confidence hadn't been empty posturing. His organization really did have the power to control information flow in Los Angeles. Her investigation had uncovered not just a trafficking network but a corruption system so extensive that it could suppress major news stories before they reached the public. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Elizabeth Chang, the plastic surgeon who had treated Maya's facial injuries, called with information that changed everything about the case. While reviewing Maya's medical files, Dr. Chang had noticed something unusual about the scarring pattern that she hadn't mentioned during their previous conversations. I've been researching the marking pattern on your face, Dr. Chang explained during a secure phone call. Those aren't random scars or even traditional gang markings. They're something much more specific, symbols used by a particular criminal organization that originated in Eastern Europe. Dr. Chang had consulted with colleagues who specialized in forensic medicine and had experience with organized crime cases. The pattern carved into Maya's face was a signature of sorts, used by a specific trafficking network to mark their territory and their victims. Other cases in different cities had shown similar scarring patterns, suggesting that the Los Angeles operation was part of a much larger international network. There's something else, Dr. Chang continued. I've been in contact with physicians in other cities who have treated similar injuries. Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Phoenix. The same scarring pattern has appeared on victims across the western United States. This isn't just a local operation, Maya. This is a coordinated enterprise operating at a national level. The revelation transformed Maya's understanding of her investigation. She hadn't just stumbled onto a local trafficking ring. She had discovered a piece of an international criminal network that operated across multiple states and possibly multiple countries. The resources and connections Victor's organization possessed suddenly made more sense when viewed in this context. Dr. Chang's research also provided Maya with crucial evidence that could corroborate her investigation. Medical records from other cities documented similar attacks on journalists, activists, and law enforcement officials who had gotten too close to trafficking operations. The scarring pattern was like a signature that connected crimes across thousands of miles and multiple jurisdictions. The FBI has a task force investigating international trafficking networks, Dr. Chang revealed. They've been looking for connections between operations in different cities. Your case might be the link they need to understand how these networks coordinate their activities. Maya felt a mixture of hope and fear as she processed this information. If she could connect her investigation to federal authorities who weren't compromised by local corruption, she might be able to expose the trafficking network despite Victor's threats. But she also understood that reaching out to federal investigators would escalate the danger to herself and anyone who had helped her investigation. The decision was made for her when Maya received a call from Maria Santos, the young woman whose testimony had started her investigation. Maria was calling from a hospital emergency room, having been attacked by unknown assailants who had carved the same scarring pattern into her face that Maya bore. "They found me at the women's shelter," Maria whispered through tears and pain. "3 men with knives. They said this was message for the journalist who wouldn't stop asking questions. They said next time they would kill me." Maya felt rage building in her chest as she realized that Victor's organization was now attacking survivors to pressure her into abandoning her investigation. Maria had already suffered months of captivity and abuse, and now she was being punished again for having the courage to speak about her experiences. "I'm coming to the hospital," Maya told Maria. "We're going to make sure you get proper medical care, and then we're going to make them pay for what they've done to you." But Maya knew that going to the hospital would expose her to potential attack by Victor's associates. Her 24-hour deadline was approaching, and she had made no indication that she would accept his offer to abandon her investigation. Every public appearance now carried the risk of immediate violence. David Chen tried to dissuade Maya from leaving the safe house. "Victor's people are probably watching the hospital. This could be a trap to draw you into the open, where they can eliminate you without witnesses." "Then we make sure there are witnesses," Maya replied, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "It's time to stop hiding from these people and start fighting back. If they want to make this public, we'll make it public." Maya began making calls to every contact she had in journalism, law enforcement, and advocacy organizations. If Victor's network wanted to escalate their campaign of violence, she would ensure that escalation occurred under maximum public scrutiny. The scars on her face had been intended as a warning to others, but Maya realized they could also serve as evidence of the trafficking network's brutality. As Maya prepared to leave the safe house and visit Maria in the hospital, she understood that she was probably walking into the final confrontation with Viktor Kozlov. But she also knew that hiding would only result in more victims like Maria being attacked to pressure her into silence. The time for caution had passed. It was time to use her marked face as a weapon against the people who had created those marks. Maya's arrival at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center was deliberately public and highly visible. She had contacted every journalist, photographer, and news crew she could reach, ensuring that her visit to Maria Santos would occur under the bright lights of media attention. If Victor's organization wanted to eliminate her, they would have to do it in front of cameras and witnesses. The hospital corridor filled with reporters as Maya made her way to Maria's room, her scarred face drawing immediate attention from every photographer present. The visual impact was exactly what Maya had intended, the marked journalist visiting the newly marked victim, both bearing identical evidence of the trafficking network's brutality. "This is what happens to people who speak out against human trafficking in Los Angeles," Maya announced to the assembled media. "Maria Santos was attacked yesterday by the same people who scarred my face 6 weeks ago. She was targeted because she had the courage to testify about her experiences as a trafficking victim." The reporters pressed closer, their cameras capturing every angle of Maya's scars while she spoke. Maya understood that she was weaponizing her own disfigurement, turning the marks intended to silence her into tools for exposing the truth. Every photograph would carry the story of the trafficking network's violence. Maria lay in her hospital bed with fresh bandages covering the left side of her face, the same side where Maya bore her scars. The parallel was intentional and obvious. Victor's organization was literally marking their enemies with identical symbols, creating a visual language of intimidation and control. "They said this was a message for you," Maria whispered to Maya, her voice barely audible through the pain medication. "They said if you don't stop your investigation, they will mark every person who helps you, every survivor who talks to you, every source who gives you information." Maya felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her as she realized the full scope of the threat Victor's organization represented. They weren't just targeting her anymore, they were systematically attacking everyone connected to her investigation, using terror tactics to isolate her from sources and support. But the media attention was already having an impact. Within hours of the hospital press conference, Maya received calls from federal investigators who had been watching the trafficking network for months without being able to build a prosecutable case. The public nature of the attacks on Maria and Maya had created political pressure for federal intervention. "We've been investigating this organization for 2 years," explained Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. "But local corruption has made it impossible to gather evidence or protect witnesses. Your investigation and the publicity around these attacks might give us the leverage we need to bypass compromised local authorities." Agent Torres revealed that the FBI had been aware of the trafficking network's existence but had been unable to penetrate their operations due to extensive corruption among local law enforcement. Maya's investigation had inadvertently provided federal authorities with evidence and publicity that could justify a major federal operation. "The scarring pattern on your face and Maria's face matches evidence from trafficking cases in 7 other cities," Torres continued. "We believe this organization operates across multiple states, which gives us federal jurisdiction. Your case might be the key to bringing down the entire network." Maya felt a glimmer of hope as she realized that her investigation was finally connecting with law enforcement agencies that had the resources and authority to take meaningful action against the trafficking network. But she also understood that federal intervention would escalate the danger to everyone involved. The proof of this escalation came that evening when Maya returned to her apartment to collect additional files for her investigation. Despite security precautions and media attention, Victor's organization had managed to break into her apartment and leave a message that made their intentions clear. Every photograph on Maya's wall had been defaced with the same scarring pattern that marked her face. Family photos, pictures with friends, images from her journalistic career, all of them had been carved with 3 parallel lines that transformed familiar faces into threats. The message was unmistakable: everyone Maya cared about was now a potential target. But Victor's organization had also made a critical mistake. In their haste to send a psychological message, they had left behind evidence that federal investigators could use to track their activities. Security cameras in Maya's building had captured images of the intruders, and forensic analysis of the break-in could provide DNA evidence and fingerprints. "They're getting sloppy," Agent Torres observed while examining Maya's vandalized apartment. "The pressure from media attention is forcing them to take risks they normally wouldn't take. We might be able to use their desperation against them." Maya realized that her strategy of publicizing the attacks had created a feedback loop that was working in her favor. The more attention her case received, the more pressure Victor's organization felt to silence her. But their attempts to escalate intimidation were also creating more evidence and more publicity, drawing additional law enforcement attention to their activities. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chang contacted Maya with results from her research into the scarring patterns. Working with forensic specialists and international law enforcement agencies, Dr. Chang had identified the specific origins of the marking system used by Victor's organization. "The scarring pattern is a signature of the Kozlov crime family," Dr. Chang explained. They originated in Moldova and have been expanding their trafficking operations across Europe and North America for the past decade. "Victor isn't just an enforcer, he's part of the family that runs this entire network." The revelation that Victor was connected to an international crime family explained the resources and reach his organization possessed. It also provided federal investigators with the international connections they needed to justify and coordinate the law
law enforcement response involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. If we can prove Victor's connection to international trafficking operations, we can use RICO statutes to prosecute the entire network. Agent Torres explained. Your investigation has provided us with evidence we never could have gathered through traditional law enforcement methods. Maya understood that she had reached a tipping point in her investigation. The attacks on her and Maria had backfired, creating the publicity and federal attention needed to challenge the trafficking network. But she also knew that Victor's organization would recognize the same threat and would likely attempt one final, desperate action to prevent their exposure. The question was whether Maya could survive long enough to see her investigation reach its conclusion.
Victor's final move came with the cold precision Maya had learned to expect from him. Rather than attempting another direct attack that would generate more publicity, he chose to strike at the heart of Maya's motivation by targeting the trafficking survivors she was trying to protect. The message came through an encrypted email that bypassed all her security precautions. Warehouse District, Pier 47, midnight. Come alone or watch them die on live video. The email included a link to a streaming video feed showing Maria Santos and 3 other trafficking survivors bound and gagged in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. The women were positioned in front of a camera with Victor clearly visible in the background, his face calm and professional as he prepared to commit murder to end Maya's investigation. This is obviously a trap, Agent Torres said when Maya contacted the FBI with Victor's ultimatum. He's trying to draw you into an isolated location where he can eliminate you and the witnesses simultaneously. We need to coordinate a tactical response, but Maya understood the timing of Victor's move. Federal investigators were closing in on the trafficking network, using evidence from her investigation to build cases against multiple targets. Victor needed to eliminate Maya and the key witnesses before federal authorities could complete their prosecutions. He was making a desperate play to salvage his organization's operations. If I don't show up, he kills them, Maya replied. If federal agents show up instead of me, he kills them and disappears. Those women are going to die unless I can find a way to get them out of there. Maya studied the video feed, using her knowledge of the Los Angeles warehouse district to identify possible locations for Victor's setup. The background visible in the video stream showed architectural details that narrowed the possible locations to a handful of abandoned buildings near the port. Agent Torres coordinated with local SWAT teams and federal tactical units, but Maya knew that any conventional law enforcement response would likely result in the immediate execution of the hostages. Victor had chosen his timing and location to maximize his advantages while minimizing law enforcement options. The solution came from an unexpected source. David Chen, the coalition attorney, had been monitoring Victor's communications through technical assistance from cybersecurity specialists working with advocacy organizations. The same encrypted email system Victor used to send Maya his ultimatum could potentially be exploited to provide law enforcement with real-time intelligence about his location and activities. We can feed the FBI tactical information without Victor knowing they're being monitored, David explained. If you can keep Victor talking while you're at the warehouse, we can guide federal agents to positions where they can intervene without endangering the hostages. Maya realized she would have to walk into Victor's trap while serving as bait to position federal agents for a rescue operation. The plan required her to maintain communication with law enforcement while appearing to comply with Victor's demands, creating opportunities for tactical intervention while avoiding immediate execution. The warehouse district at midnight was a maze of shadows and industrial equipment that provided excellent cover for both predators and potential rescuers. Maya approached Pier 47 knowing that federal agents were positioning themselves throughout the area, but also knowing that Victor's organization had the experience and resources to detect law enforcement presence. The abandoned warehouse Victor had chosen was a perfect killing ground, isolated, soundproof, and easily defended against outside intervention. Maya could see light coming from windows on the second floor, where the video feed had shown the hostages being held. Getting to them would require passing through multiple choke points where Victor could easily ambush her. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message as she approached the warehouse entrance. Walk through the front door. Leave all communication devices outside. Any sign of law enforcement results in immediate execution of hostages. The demand to abandon her communication equipment would cut her off from federal backup, but Maya understood that Victor would be monitoring for electronic signals that could indicate law enforcement presence. She placed her phone and radio outside the warehouse entrance, knowing that she was now truly alone in confronting the man who had marked her for death. The warehouse interior was dark except for emergency lighting that created pools of illumination connected by corridors of shadow. Maya could hear voices coming from the second floor, where Victor was apparently addressing his hostages. She began climbing the metal staircase toward the sounds, each step bringing her closer to what would likely be her final confrontation. "Miss Rodriguez," Victor's voice called out as Maya reached the second floor landing. "You are punctual. I appreciate professionalism, even in enemies." Maya entered the main warehouse space to find Victor standing behind the four bound women, a pistol in his hand, an expression of grim satisfaction on his face. The video equipment was still recording, ensuring that whatever happened next would be documented for whoever might find the bodies. "You have caused considerable problems for my organization," Victor continued. "Your investigation has attracted federal attention that will cost us millions of dollars in lost operations. My employers are not pleased with this development." Maya could see Maria Santos among the hostages, her face still bandaged from the recent attack but her eyes showing recognition and desperate hope. The other three women were strangers to Maya, but their faces showed the same mixture of terror and resignation she had seen in too many trafficking survivors. "Let them go," Maya said, knowing the request was pointless but needing to establish her priorities. "Your problem is with me, not with them." Victor laughed, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. "My problem is with everyone who threatens my organization's operations. These women are witnesses to our activities. You are a witness to our activities. Federal agents are building cases based on witness testimony. The solution is quite simple." Maya realized that Victor intended to kill everyone present regardless of any cooperation she offered. He had moved beyond intimidation to elimination, choosing to end the threat to his organization through mass murder rather than risk continued exposure. But Maya also noticed something Victor apparently hadn't: shadows moving in the warehouse windows, indicating that federal agents had successfully positioned themselves around the building despite his security precautions. The standoff in the warehouse stretched into minutes that felt like hours, with Victor maintaining his position behind the hostages while Maya stood exposed in the center of the room. The video equipment continued recording, creating a permanent record of what Victor clearly intended to be his final solution to the problems Maya's investigation had created for his organization. "Your scars were meant to be a warning," Victor said, studying Maya's marked face with professional satisfaction. "But you chose to ignore that warning and continue your investigation. Now those scars will be evidence in a murder investigation that will never be solved." Maya realized that Victor was explaining his actions for the video record, creating a narrative that would confuse investigators and misdirect attention away from the trafficking network. He was treating the murders as a final act of psychological warfare against law enforcement and journalism. But Victor had made a crucial error in his positioning. Standing behind the hostages gave him a clear field of fire toward Maya, but it also blocked his view of the where federal agents were preparing their intervention. Maya needed to keep his attention focused on her while maintaining her position in the center of the room. "The FBI knows about your family's operations," Maya said, hoping to provoke Victor into revealing more information that could be useful for prosecution. "They've been tracking Kozlov crime family activities across multiple countries. Killing me won't stop the federal investigation." Victor's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that federal attention to his family's operations was a more serious concern than he had previously admitted. Maya realized she had touched on something that genuinely worried him: the possibility that his actions in Los Angeles had drawn international law enforcement attention to his family's broader criminal enterprises. "My family has survived law enforcement attention for 3 generations," Victor replied, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been present before. We adapt, we relocate, we eliminate threats. This situation is no different. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the world indicated that federal agents were beginning their intervention. Victor heard it too, his head turning slightly toward the noise before snapping back to focus on Maya. His professional composure was beginning to crack as he realized that his carefully planned execution was becoming a tactical nightmare. Your investigation ends tonight, Victor announced, raising his pistol toward Maya's head. These women die as examples to other potential witnesses. You die as an example to other journalists. The story dies with all of you. But before Victor could fire, Maya heard Maria Santos shout a warning in Spanish. One of the other hostages had managed to work her bonds loose and was launching herself at Victor's legs, disrupting his aim just as federal agents burst through the warehouse windows on rappelling lines. The next 30 seconds were chaos as tactical teams flooded the warehouse space while Victor struggled to maintain control of his hostages. Maya dove for cover behind industrial equipment as gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She could hear tactical radio chatter and shouted commands, but couldn't see what was happening through the maze of machinery and shadows. When the shooting stopped, Maya emerged from cover to find Victor on the floor, with federal agents providing medical attention for what appeared to be serious but non-fatal wounds. The 4 hostages were being freed from their bonds by FBI personnel, while tactical teams secured the warehouse and established a crime scene perimeter. Maya, are you injured? Agent Torres called out as she spotted Maya among the industrial equipment. I'm fine, Maya replied, though she was shaking from adrenaline and the realization of how close they had all come to death. Are the hostages okay? Everyone's alive, Torres confirmed. Victor took rounds in the shoulder and leg, but he'll survive to stand trial. We also captured 2 of his associates who were providing perimeter security. Maya approached the area where Victor was receiving medical treatment, wanting to see the man who had marked her face rendered powerless and defeated. But Victor's eyes still held the cold calculation she remembered from their previous encounters, and she realized that his capture might not end the threat his organization represented. This changes nothing, Victor said when he noticed Maya watching him. My family has resources you cannot imagine. There will be others to continue our operations. Agent Torres intervened before Maya could respond. Mr. Kozlov, you're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. But Maya understood that Victor's warning contained an element of truth. His capture would disrupt the trafficking network's operations in Los Angeles, but it wouldn't necessarily end them permanently. International crime families had the resources to replace captured personnel and rebuild damaged operations. The video equipment Victor had been using to record his planned executions was seized by federal agents as evidence. Maya realized that Victor's intention to document his crimes had backfired, providing law enforcement with detailed evidence of his activities and statements that could be used in prosecution. The video shows Victor explicitly describing his organization's activities and his family's involvement in international trafficking. Torres explained to Maya as the crime scene was processed. Combined with Elena Volkov's financial records and your investigative files, we have enough evidence to prosecute the entire network. Maya felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as she realized that her investigation had finally achieved its goal. The trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years was now exposed and disrupted, with its key personnel in federal custody. But the cost had been enormous. Elena was still missing and presumed dead. Multiple survivors had been attacked, and Maya herself bore permanent marks of the violence her investigation had provoked. As federal agents escorted Victor from the warehouse, Maya touched the scars on her face and understood that they had indeed become warnings. Warnings to other criminal organizations that their crimes would be exposed, their victims would be protected, and their operations would be dismantled regardless of the cost to those who opposed them. The marks Victor had carved into her flesh as symbols of intimidation had become symbols of resistance,
proof that some people cannot be silenced by violence and that truth has a power that transcends fear. The federal investigation that followed Victor's arrest revealed the true scope of the trafficking network Maya had been investigating. Working with evidence from her files, Elena's financial records, and intelligence gathered during the war, federal agents unraveled a criminal enterprise that spanned 12 states and involved connections to organized crime families in Eastern Europe. Maya found herself at the center of a media storm as news outlets across the country picked up her story. The images of her scarred face became symbolic of investigative journalism's power to expose corruption and protect vulnerable populations. But Maya understood that the publicity came with continued risks. Victor's capture had disrupted one trafficking network, but it had also made her a target for other criminal organizations who might want to send their own messages about the consequences of investigative journalism. The first breakthrough in dismantling the larger network came when federal agents discovered Victor's communication records. His phone and computer contained detailed correspondence with traffickers in other cities, revealing a sophisticated coordination system that allowed different branches of the organization to share resources, move victims between locations, and coordinate their corruption of local officials. "This is bigger than we initially realized," Agent Torres explained during a debriefing session with Maya and her legal team. Victor's organization was connected to trafficking networks in Seattle, Phoenix, Denver, and Houston. "We're coordinating with federal agents in those cities to conduct simultaneous raids and arrests." Maya felt vindicated as she realized that her investigation had exposed not just a local criminal operation but a significant piece of an international trafficking system. The scars on her face had bought information that would potentially save hundreds of victims across multiple states, but the investigation also revealed troubling information about the extent of corruption that had protected the trafficking network. Elena's financial records, combined with evidence seized during Victor's arrest, documented bribes paid to dozens of police officers, immigration officials, judges, and federal agents across multiple jurisdictions. "We're looking at corruption cases involving more than 40 law enforcement personnel," Torres continued. "Some of these people have been protecting trafficking operations for years, ensuring that investigations would be misdirected or abandoned before they could threaten the network." Maya realized that the corruption she had encountered during her investigation wasn't unique to Los Angeles, but represented a systematic strategy used by trafficking organizations to operate with impunity. The bribes and threats that had initially seemed like obstacles to her reporting were actually evidence of a much larger pattern of criminal control over law enforcement. The vindication Maya felt was tempered by personal costs that continued to mount even after Victor's arrest. Elena Volkov's body was discovered in a well, showing evidence of torture that suggested she had been killed slowly as punishment for her cooperation with Maya's investigation. The knowledge that Elena had died because of their collaboration added another layer of guilt to Maya's already complex emotional burden. Maria Santos and the other trafficking survivors who had been rescued from Victor's warehouse faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while dealing with trauma from both their original captivity and the recent violence. Maya felt responsible for their continued safety, knowing that other members of Victor's organization might target them for revenge or to prevent their testimony in upcoming trials. "The survivors need long-term protection and support," David Chen explained during a planning meeting with advocacy organizations. "These women have been through multiple traumas, and they're going to be key witnesses in federal prosecutions that could take years to complete." Maya used her media prominence to advocate for resources and protection for trafficking survivors, understanding that her marked face gave her a platform that could be used to draw attention to their needs. Every interview she gave, every article she wrote, included information about the ongoing challenges faced by people who had escaped trafficking operations. The media attention also brought unexpected benefits. News outlets that had initially rejected Maya's investigation now competed to publish her complete findings. Book publishers offered contracts for a comprehensive account of her investigation and its aftermath. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell her story for television and streaming platforms. But Maya remained focused on the original goal of her investigation, ensuring that the trafficking network was completely dismantled and that its victims received justice. She worked closely with federal prosecutors to prepare for trials that would begin in the coming months, reviewing evidence and identifying witnesses who could testify about the network's operations. The first major trial began 6 months after Victor's arrest. Federal prosecutors used Maya's investigative files as the foundation for a case that ultimately resulted in convictions for 37 defendants across multiple states. Victor himself was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again be able to mark another victim. During Victor's sentencing hearing, Maya was asked to provide a victim impact statement describing how his crimes had affected her life. Standing at the podium in the federal courthouse, her scars clearly visible to everyone in the courtroom, Maya spoke about the women who had been trafficked, the sources who had been killed for helping her investigation, and the importance of holding criminal organizations accountable for their actions. These scars were intended to silence me, Maya said, touching the marks on her face, but they became a reminder that some stories are too important to abandon regardless of the personal cost. Every trafficking survivor deserves to have their story told, and every criminal organization needs to understand that their crimes will be exposed. Victor showed no emotion during Maya's statement, but Maya noticed several members of his organization in the courtroom gallery taking notes and photographs. She realized that even his conviction wouldn't end the threat his family represented, and that other criminal organizations were studying her case to understand how to better protect themselves from investigative journalists. As Maya left the courthouse after Victor's sentencing, she understood that her investigation had achieved its primary goal. The trafficking network had been dismantled, its leaders were in prison, and hundreds of victims had been freed from captivity. But she also knew that her marked face would forever make her a target for other criminal organizations who might want to send their own messages about the consequences of exposing their operations. The scars Victor had carved into her face as warnings had indeed become warnings to every criminal organization that their crimes would be investigated, their victims would be protected, and their operations would be exposed regardless of the violence they used to maintain their power. 2 years after Victor Kozlov's conviction, Maya Rodriguez stood before a mirror in her new apartment, studying the scars that had become the defining feature of her life. The 3 parallel lines had faded slightly with time, but they remained clearly visible, a permanent reminder of the price she had paid for pursuing truth. What had changed was how she saw those marks, no longer as evidence of victimization but as symbols of survival and purpose that connected her to a mission larger than herself. The apartment walls were covered with photographs and documents from her ongoing investigations into human trafficking networks across the United States. Maya had discovered that her work on the Kozlov organization was just the beginning of a career dedicated to exposing criminal forces that exploited vulnerable populations. Her scarred face had become a credential that opened doors other journalists couldn't access, marking her as someone who understood the real cost of speaking truth to power. The Kozlov investigation had established Maya as one of the country's leading experts on human trafficking, leading to consulting work with federal agencies, advocacy organizations, and international law enforcement. Her book about the investigation had become a bestseller, with proceeds funding a foundation that provided support for trafficking survivors and protection for journalists investigating organized crime. But the most significant development had been the formation of a network of journalists, investigators, and activists who had all been marked by criminal organizations for their work exposing human trafficking. Maya had discovered that her experience with Victor wasn't unique. Across the country, people who challenged trafficking networks were being systematically targeted for violence and intimidation. The scars connect us, explained Jennifer Walsh, a former FBI agent who had been attacked by traffickers started an undercover operation in Phoenix. They tried to mark us as warnings to others, but instead they marked us as people who won't be silenced. The network Maya had helped establish included 12 individuals who bore similar scars from trafficking organizations, each representing a different aspect of the fight against modern slavery. Their shared experience of violence had created bonds that transcended professional boundaries, forming a community of people uniquely qualified to understand the dangers and importance of their work. Maya's foundation had funded the establishment of safe houses in 6 cities, providing secure locations where trafficking survivors could receive medical care, legal assistance, and psychological support, without fear of retaliation from their former captors. The program had already helped more than 300 survivors rebuild their lives and testify against their traffickers. But perhaps the most meaningful development had been Maya's relationship with Maria Santos, the young woman whose testimony had started her investigation. Maria had recovered from her physical injuries and was now studying journalism at UCLA, inspired by Maya's example to pursue a career exposing injustice and protecting vulnerable populations. "Your scars saved my life," Maria had told Maya during a recent foundation event. "If you hadn't been marked, if you hadn't continued investigating despite the threats, I would still be trapped in that warehouse. Every time I see your face, I remember that someone cared enough about people like me to risk everything." Maya's work had also attracted the attention of international law enforcement agencies investigating trafficking networks with global reach. The Kozlov organization had been connected to criminal families in Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine, and Maya's investigation had provided crucial intelligence for prosecutions in multiple countries. The personal cost of her commitment remained significant. Maya's romantic relationship struggled under the weight of her public profile and the continued security threats that followed her work. Her family worried constantly about her safety, and she had been forced to relocate multiple times when new threats emerged from criminal organizations seeking revenge for her investigations. But Maya had found purpose in her marked faith that transcended personal happiness or safety. Every trafficking survivor who found freedom, every criminal organization that was dismantled, every corrupt official who was prosecuted, represented validation for the choice she had made to continue her investigation despite Victor's warnings. The most recent development in Maya's work involved collaboration with technology companies to develop systems for tracking and disrupting online trafficking networks. Criminal organizations had adapted to law enforcement pressure by moving their operations to encrypted platforms and cryptocurrency systems, requiring new approaches to investigation and prosecution. Technology is changing faster than law enforcement can adapt, Maya explained during a recent conference on trafficking prevention. "We need partnerships between journalists, advocates, and technology experts to stay ahead of criminal innovation." The scars had indeed become warnings, but not the kind Victor had intended. They warned criminal organizations that their crimes would be investigated, their victims would be protected, and their operations would be exposed by people who could not be intimidated or silenced. They warned corrupt officials that their collaboration with traffickers would be documented and prosecuted. They warned society that human trafficking was not a distant problem, but a present reality that required active resistance. Maya's reflection showed her a face that bore permanent evidence of violence, but also permanent evidence of her refusal to be broken by that violence. The marks Victor had intended as self-defeat had become symbols of defiance, connecting her to a community of people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable and exposing the truth. As Maya prepared for another day of investigating criminal organizations that prefer to operate in darkness, she understood that her scars would continue to serve as both warning and inspiration. warning to criminals that their crimes would not go unpunished, and inspiration to others that resistance against evil is possible, even when it comes at tremendous personal cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.